The morning fog hung thick over San Francisco Bay as Marcus Sterling stood in his corner office on the 42nd floor of Sterling Tower, reviewing the quarterly reports that would determine several people's futures. The numbers on his tablet glowed stark against the grey cityscape beyond his floor-to-ceiling windows, each percentage point representing millions in revenue that had fallen short of projections for the second consecutive quarter. Marcus ran a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair, his jaw tightening as he processed the implications. At 32, he had built Sterling Innovations from a college dorm room idea into a tech empire worth $3 billion, and he hadn't achieved that success by accepting mediocrity. The company's reputation for cutting-edge consumer technology demanded nothing less than excellence from every employee, from senior executives down to the newest interns. "Sarah, send department heads to conference room A in 10 minutes, he spoke into his intercom, his voice carrying the crisp authority that had become his trademark. "And pull the employee performance reviews for Q3, all departments." His assistant's professional acknowledgement crackled through the speaker as Marcus straightened his charcoal suit jacket and gathered the damning reports. The walk to the conference room felt longer than usual, his Italian leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floors. Employees he passed in the hallway offered nervous smiles, sensing the tension that seemed to radiate from their CEO whenever numbers disappointed. The conference room buzzed with anxious energy as 7 department heads filed in, their expressions ranging from cautiously optimistic to visibly concerned. Marcus took his seat at the head of the sleek glass table, his presence commanding immediate silence. "The numbers are unacceptable," he began without preamble, sliding copies of the quarterly report across the table. "Marketing is down 12%, product development has delivered nothing revolutionary in 8 months, and customer satisfaction scores are trending downward for the first time in 3 years. Rebecca Martinez, the head of human resources, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Marcus, while the numbers are disappointing, we need to consider the broader market conditions. The tech sector doesn't care about our excuses, Rebecca," Marcus interrupted, his steel-grey eyes fixed on her. "Our competitors aren't making excuses. They're eating our market share while we discuss broader conditions." He stood, pacing behind his chair as he continued. "Effective immediately, we're implementing a 15% workforce reduction across all departments. No exceptions. I want performance reviews and termination lists on my desk by 5 p.m. today." The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the building's ventilation system. Outside the windows, the fog was beginning to lift, revealing the sprawling tech campus below where hundreds of employees went about their morning routines, unaware that some of their careers were about to end. "Marcus," ventured David Kim from product development, "some of our junior staff are working on promising projects. Maybe we could consider reassigning rather than—" "David, your department's junior staff had 6 months to prove their worth. If they haven't delivered results by now, they're not going to." Marcus returned to his seat, his decision final. "I need results, not potential. This company wasn't built on maybes and could-bes." As the meeting concluded and department heads filed out with their grim assignments, Marcus returned to his office, feeling the familiar weight of difficult leadership decisions. He had learned long ago that sentiment had no place in business. Every person on his payroll needed to justify their position with measurable contributions, and those who couldn't meet that standard would find opportunities elsewhere. By late afternoon, the lists had arrived as requested. Marcus reviewed each name carefully, cross-referencing performance metrics and project contributions. Most decisions were straightforward, employees who had consistently underperformed or failed to meet clearly defined objectives. But some names gave him pause, particularly those from the Intern program. Among them was Emma Chen, a 24-year-old product development intern who had joined the company 6 months earlier. Her performance reviews were neither outstanding nor problematic. She had completed assigned tasks competently, but had never stood out in team meetings or presentations. Marcus recalled her vaguely, quiet, always sitting in the back during department meetings, never volunteering ideas or asking questions that demonstrated ambition or innovation. He initiated her termination with a brief note in the system. In his experience, employees who faded into the background rarely possessed the drive necessary for Sterling Innovations' demanding environment. If she hadn't made an impact in 6 months, she likely never would. As evening approached and the termination notices went out via email, Marcus felt the satisfaction of decisive action. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight he could rest, knowing that Sterling Innovations would emerge leaner, more focused, and better positioned for future success. The fog outside had completely lifted, revealing a clear view of the bay and the competitive landscape beyond. He had no way of knowing that one of the names on his termination list would soon become the most costly mistake of his career. Emma Chen's hands trembled slightly as she read the termination email for the third time. The words "immediate cessation of employment" blurring through the tears she refused to let fall. She sat in her small cubicle in the product development section of Sterling Tower's 38th floor, surrounded by the personal items she would need to pack. A small, succulent plant her roommate had given her for luck, a Stanford University mug that held her collection of mechanical pencils, and a framed photo of her parents standing proudly outside their small restaurant in Chinatown. The email had arrived at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, along with dozens of others sent to employees across various departments. Emma watched colleagues around her react with shock, anger, or quiet resignation as they received similar messages. Some gathered in small groups, whispering about severance packages and job prospects, while others immediately began making phone calls to update their LinkedIn profiles or reach out to professional contacts. Emma did none of these things. Instead, she methodically began transferring files from her workstation to her personal drive, her movements careful and deliberate, despite the chaos erupting around her. Most of the files were routine documentation, project notes, and research materials that would be meaningless outside the context of Sterling Innovations. But buried among the standard intern assignments was a folder labeled UI Concept Personal, containing months of work that represented her true passion. She paused before copying this folder, knowing that technically anything created on company equipment belonged to Sterling Innovations. But Marcus Sterling had just made it clear that neither she nor her contributions were valued here. The project had been developed entirely during her lunch hours and after official work time, born from her observation of how users struggled with existing interface designs across various Sterling products. The concept was elegantly simple, an adaptive user interface that learned individual interaction patterns and customized itself accordingly, reducing the cognitive load on users while increasing efficiency and satisfaction. Emma had built working prototypes, conducted informal user testing with friends and family, and documented significant improvements in task completion rates and user engagement. She had been gathering courage to present the idea to her supervisor for weeks, but her natural shyness and the intimidating corporate environment had kept her silent. "Emma?" A voice interrupted her file transfer. She looked up to see Jake Morrison, a fellow intern from the marketing department, standing beside her cubicle with a cardboard box of his own belongings. His usually cheerful demeanor was subdued, but he managed a sympathetic smile. "Looks like we're in the same boat." Emma nodded, minimizing the file transfer window. "I saw your name on the list when HR called us all in. I'm sorry, Jake. I know you were hoping to transition to full-time." "Yeah, well," Jake shrugged, though the disappointment was evident in his voice. "Maybe it's for the best. I never felt like I fit the culture here anyway. Too much pressure, not enough collaboration. What about you? You seem to really enjoy the technical work." Emma considered her response carefully. The truth was that she had loved the work. The challenge of solving complex user experience problems, the satisfaction of creating something elegant and functional, the potential to improve how millions of people interacted with technology. She had dreamed of building a career at Sterling Innovations, contributing to products that could make a real difference in people's lives. "I thought I did," she said finally, completing the file transfer and ejecting her personal drive. "But maybe I was fooling myself. Mr. Sterling made it pretty clear that if you can't prove your worth in 6 months, you don't belong here." Jake frowned. "You know, that's what bothers me about this whole thing. They never really gave us a chance to prove ourselves. When was the last time anyone asked for our ideas or input? We were just extra hands for grunt work." Emma packed her succulent plant carefully in a small box, wrapping its pot in tissue paper. Jake's observation stung because it was accurate. Despite her technical background and genuine insights into user experience design, she had spent most of her internship conducting routine compatibility tests and organizing project documentation. The few times she had attempted to share observations or suggestions, They had been politely acknowledged and promptly ignored. "Maybe that's how internships are supposed to work," she said, though she didn't entirely believe it. "We're supposed to learn by observing and supporting, not by trying to revolutionize everything." "Or maybe," Jake said, hefting his box and preparing to leave, "they just hired the wrong kind of people to recognize talent when they see it." After Jake left, Emma completed her packing in solitude. The office around her had largely emptied as terminated employees departed, and remaining staff tried to process the day's events. She took a final look at her workstation, mentally reviewing the projects she would leave unfinished and the contributions she would never have the chance to make. As she walked toward the elevator, Emma passed the conference room where she had attended countless team meetings, always sitting quietly in the back, always hoping that someday she would find the courage to speak up and share her ideas. Through the glass walls, she could see Marcus Sterling speaking with department heads, his expression focused and authoritative as he discussed the company's future direction, a future that would continue without her. The elevator descended silently toward the lobby, carrying Emma away from the dreams she had harbored for 6 months. In her bag, the personal drive containing her UI concept felt heavier than its actual weight, representing both the potential she had failed to realize and the possibility that her ideas might find a better home elsewhere. She stepped out into the cool San Francisco evening, the city's lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk, and walked toward the BART station that would take her home to the small apartment she shared with 2 roommates in Oakland. Tomorrow would bring the challenge of job searching and the need to explain her brief tenure at Sterling Innovations to potential employers. What Emma didn't know was that her quiet departure would set in motion a series of events that would ultimately prove Jake's parting observation more prophetic than either of them could have imagined. 3 months after the mass layoffs, Sterling Innovations buzzed with renewed energy. The leaner workforce had indeed proven more focused, and Marcus Sterling felt vindicated in his difficult decisions as he reviewed the preliminary metrics for their latest product launch. The neural flow interface system had exceeded all projections in its first month, generating more user engagement and positive feedback than any product in the company's history. Marcus stood in the product development lab, watching his team demonstrate neural flow's capabilities to a group of potential investors. The interface seemed almost magical in its responsiveness, adapting to each user's behavior patterns and creating personalized experiences that felt intuitive and effortless. Industry analysts were calling it revolutionary, and pre-orders had already surpassed their most optimistic forecasts. "The beauty of neural flow," explained David Kim, addressing the investors while manipulating the interface on a large display screen, "lies in its ability to learn and adapt in real time. Instead of forcing users to conform to rigid menu structures, the system observes interaction patterns and reorganizes itself to maximize efficiency and minimize cognitive load." Marcus watched with satisfaction as the investors leaned forward, clearly impressed by the demonstration. One of them, Patricia Wells from Quantum Ventures, raised her hand with a question that made Marcus's chest swell with pride. "Mr. Sterling, this represents a fundamental shift in user interface design. How did your team conceive of this approach? It seems to address problems that other companies haven't even recognized yet." Marcus stepped forward, his confidence radiating as he prepared to answer. "Patricia, this is exactly the kind of innovation that happens when you maintain the highest standards for your development team. We don't accept incremental improvements. We demand breakthrough thinking." David shifted uncomfortably beside him, a movement Marcus noticed but dismissed. Since the layoffs, David had occasionally seemed hesitant during presentations, but Marcus attributed this to the natural adjustment period following significant organizational changes. "The concept emerged from our team's deep analysis of user frustration points across multiple platforms," Marcus continued. "We identified that traditional interfaces force users to adapt to technology when the relationship should be reversed. Neural flow represents months of innovative thinking and collaborative problem-solving." After the investors departed with enthusiastic promises to move forward with funding, Marcus remained in the lab with David and the core development team. The success of neural flow had positioned Sterling Innovations for its most significant growth phase yet, and Marcus wanted to ensure they capitalized on every opportunity. "David, I want you to prepare a comprehensive presentation for the board meeting next week," Marcus instructed. "Include development timeline, resource allocation, and projections for the next iteration. This is going to be our flagship product for the next 3 years. David nodded, but his expression remained troubled. Marcus, there's something we need to discuss about NeuralFlow's development history. I've been meaning to bring this up since the launch, but with all the excitement and media attention, what kind of discussion? Marcus's tone sharpened slightly. He had learned to pay attention when his department head seemed evasive about project details. It's about the original concept development, the core algorithms and user behavior prediction models that make NeuralFlow possible. They weren't developed by the current team. David paused, clearly struggling with how to proceed. We found them in the shared development server, in a folder structure that suggested they were created during the spring intern program. Marcus felt a chill of apprehension. What exactly are you telling me, David? The foundational work for NeuralFlow was already complete when we started the project. Whoever created it had built working prototypes, conducted user testing, and documented significant performance improvements. We essentially took their concept and refined it for commercial deployment. The lab seemed to grow quieter around them, despite the continued activity of engineers and designers working at their stations. Marcus processed David's words, their implications becoming clearer and more troubling with each passing second. You're saying someone else invented NeuralFlow? Marcus's voice was dangerously low. The core innovation, yes, the adaptive learning algorithms, the behavioral prediction models, the entire theoretical framework, it was all there, fully developed and documented. We added the commercial polish and integration capabilities, but the breakthrough thinking you just described to those investors, that came from someone else. Marcus felt his carefully constructed narrative beginning to crumble. NeuralFlow wasn't just Sterling Innovation's most successful product. It was his personal vindication, proof that his leadership style and demanding standards produced superior results. The media interviews, the industry recognition, the investment interest, all of it was built on the assumption that his team had created something genuinely revolutionary. Who? The single word carried all of Marcus's growing dread. David retrieved a tablet from his workstation and pulled up file directory information. According to the metadata, the files were created by Emma Chen. She was one of the interns terminated in September. The timestamps show she worked on this during lunch hours and after official work time over several months. Emma Chen. Marcus had a vague recollection of the name from the termination lists, a quiet intern who had never made an impression during department meetings. He remembered her as unremarkable, someone who faded into the background and failed to demonstrate the kind of initiative he expected from Sterling Innovation's employees. That's impossible, Marcus said, though his certainty was already wavering. She never presented any ideas, never participated in innovation sessions, never showed any indication of this kind of capability. I know it seems unlikely, but the documentation is comprehensive. She even included user testing results and iterative improvements based on feedback. This wasn't just a concept, it was a fully developed solution looking for implementation. Marcus stared at the tablet screen, watching as David scrolled through folders filled with detailed technical documentation, user interface mock-ups and performance analysis reports. The work represented months of sophisticated thinking and careful development, the kind of breakthrough innovation that defined industry leaders. And he had fired the person who created it, dismissing her as unremarkable and expendable. How many people know about this? Marcus asked, his mind already racing through the potential consequences. Just the core development team, and we've kept it confidential pending guidance from you. But Marcus, this isn't something we can ignore indefinitely. The success of NeuralFlow means there's going to be increased scrutiny, technical analysis, patent discussions. Eventually, someone's going to trace the development history. Marcus walked to the lab's windows, looking out over the San Francisco skyline as he contemplated the magnitude of his mistake. NeuralFlow had already been featured in major technology publications, and he had given several interviews taking credit for the innovative vision behind the product. The legal implications alone could be devastating, not to mention the damage to his reputation and the company's credibility. But beyond the professional consequences, Marcus found himself confronting an uncomfortable personal reality. He had prided himself on his ability to identify and nurture talent, yet he had completely overlooked someone with genuine innovative capability. Emma Chen had been sitting in his organization for 6 months, quietly developing breakthrough technology, and he had not only failed to recognize her potential, but had actively removed her from the company. "We need to find her," Marcus said finally, turning back to David. "Before this goes any further, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with and determine the best path forward." David nodded, though his expression suggested he understood the complexity of the situation they were facing. "I'll start with HR records to get her contact information, but Marcus, we need to think carefully about how we approach this. Emma Chen may not be interested in a simple conversation about her work, especially given how her employment here ended." As Marcus left the lab that evening, Neural Flow's success felt less like vindication and more like a ticking time bomb. The product that was supposed to represent his leadership excellence had instead revealed his most significant blind spot, and the quiet intern he had dismissed without a second thought now held the key to either his redemption or his downfall. Emma Chen had never imagined that unemployment could feel so liberating. After 3 months of job searching punctuated by freelance web design projects and part-time barista work, she had settled into a routine that, while financially precarious, offered something her internship at Sterling Innovations never had: creative freedom. She sat in the corner booth at Café Luna, a small coffee shop in Oakland's Temescal district, her laptop open to a video call with her latest client, a small non-profit organization that helped immigrant families navigate social services. The work didn't pay much, but it felt meaningful in a way that corporate product development never had. "The interface you've designed makes such a difference," said Maria Santos, the non-profit's director, her voice crackling through the laptop speakers. "Our clients can actually navigate the system now. Yesterday, Mrs. Nguyen was able to complete her entire benefits application without assistance for the first time." Emma smiled, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses as she made notes on the feedback. "I'm glad it's working well. The next update will include the multilingual support we discussed, and I'm working on some accessibility improvements for users with limited digital experience." As Maria continued describing the positive impact of Emma's work, Emma felt a satisfaction that had been absent during her corporate internship. Here she could see direct results from her efforts, real people whose lives were improved by thoughtful design and intuitive interfaces. It wasn't the prestige or financial security of a major tech company, but it was fulfilling in ways she was still learning to appreciate. After ending the call, Emma opened her personal project folder, the same one she had copied from Sterling Innovations on her last day. The UI concept that had never seen the light of day at her former company had evolved considerably over the past 3 months. Working with diverse clients and observing how different populations interacted with technology had given her insights that would have been impossible to gain within Sterling's insular corporate environment. She was deep in code when a familiar voice interrupted her concentration. "Emma? Emma Chen?" She looked up to see Marcus Sterling standing beside her table, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. He wore dark jeans and a casual button-down shirt instead of his usual business attire, and his typically perfect hair showed signs of having been run through with nervous fingers. Even so, he remained imposing, and Emma felt the familiar anxiety that had plagued her throughout her internship. "Mr. Sterling," she managed, closing her laptop instinctively. This is unexpected. May I sit down?" Marcus gestured to the empty chair across from her, his tone more polite than she remembered from their few interactions at Sterling Innovations. Emma nodded, unsure of what else to do. The cafe buzzed with its usual afternoon crowd, remote workers, students, and neighborhood regulars, providing a buffer of ambient noise that made the encounter feel slightly less surreal. Marcus settled into the chair, looking around the cafe as if seeing such an environment for the first time. "This is a nice place. Do you come here often?" "It's close to where I live," Emma replied carefully, wondering what had brought the CEO of a billion-dollar company to a small Oakland coffee shop. "The Wi-Fi is reliable, and they don't mind if you work for hours." An awkward silence stretched between them as Marcus seemed to gather his thoughts. Emma studied his face, noting the tension around his eyes and the way his hands moved restlessly on the table. This was not the confident, authoritative figure she remembered from corporate meetings. "Emma, I owe you an apology," Marcus said finally. "Several apologies, actually, but I'm not sure where to begin." Emma blinked in surprise. An apology was the last thing she had expected from Marcus Sterling, a man who seemed incapable of admitting error or showing vulnerability. "I made a significant mistake when I terminated your employment," Marcus continued. "I failed to recognize your contributions and I failed to create an environment where your talents could be properly utilized. Emma felt a mixture of vindication and confusion. Mr. Sterling, I appreciate you saying that, but I'm not sure I understand. My performance reviews were adequate, but I never really stood out. I know I wasn't the kind of employee Sterling Innovations was looking for. Marcus leaned forward, his expression growing more intense. That's where you're wrong, Emma. You were exactly the kind of employee we needed. We just didn't realize it at the time. He paused, seeming to wrestle with how much to reveal. We discovered your UI concept in the development servers, the adaptive interface system you created. We've been developing it further, and it's become our most successful product launch in company history. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. The project she had worked on privately, the innovation she had been too shy to present, had been discovered and developed without her knowledge or involvement. You found my files? Your breakthrough became our breakthrough, Emma, and I had no idea it existed until 3 months after I fired you. Marcus's voice carried a weight of regret that seemed genuine. The product we're calling Neural Flow. It's built on your foundational work. Your algorithms, your behavioral prediction models, your entire theoretical framework. Emma stared at him, processing the implications. Her private project, the one she had developed during lunch hours and late evenings, had become Sterling Innovations' flagship product. The recognition and success she had dreamed of achieving had happened without her, using work she had created but never had the courage to share. I don't know what to say, Emma said quietly. I worked on that for months, hoping someday I'd be brave enough to present it. I thought maybe if I could perfect it enough, if I could make it undeniably valuable. You did make it undeniably valuable, Marcus interrupted. We've had industry analysts calling it revolutionary. Investors are lining up to fund expansion. The user engagement metrics are unlike anything we've seen before. Emma felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride that her work had been validated, anger that it had been used without her knowledge, and a deep sadness for the opportunity she had missed by remaining silent. What happens now? She asked. Are you here to offer me my job back, or are you worried about legal issues? Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Honestly, Emma, I'm not sure. When I learned the truth about Neural Flow's origins, my first instinct was to manage the situation, to minimize potential complications. But sitting here with you now, realizing what I failed to see when you worked for me, I think I'm here because I need to understand how I missed something so significant. Emma considered his words, studying the man who had dismissed her so casually 3 months earlier. There was something different about him now, a humility she had never witnessed during her internship, a willingness to acknowledge failure that seemed foreign to his usual persona. You missed it because I never shared it, Emma said finally. I was too intimidated by the corporate environment, too afraid that my ideas weren't good enough. I spent 6 months waiting for the perfect moment to speak up, and that moment never came. Marcus nodded slowly, as if her explanation confirmed something he had been thinking. But that's exactly my point, Emma. A good leader, a good organization, shouldn't require employees to overcome intimidation to contribute their best work. We should have created an environment where your ideas could surface naturally. As they continued talking, Emma found herself seeing Marcus Sterling in a new light, not as the intimidating corporate leader she had feared, but as someone genuinely grappling with the consequences of his leadership style. The conversation that had begun with such tension was evolving into something more complex, a dialogue about recognition, opportunity, and the quiet voices that often go unheard in competitive environments. What neither of them realized was that this chance encounter in a small Oakland cafe would mark the beginning of a transformation that would ultimately change both of their lives in ways they could never have anticipated. The conversation at Café Luna stretched well into the evening, with Marcus and Emma moving from awkward apologies to genuine dialogue about innovation, leadership, and the often invisible contributions that drive technological progress. As the cafe began to empty and the baristas started their closing routines, Marcus found himself reluctant to end what had become the most enlightening conversation he'd had in months. Emma, I have a proposition for you, Marcus said, leaning forward across the small table. The ambient lighting cast softer shadows than the harsh fluorescence of Sterling Tower, and he felt more like himself than he had in years. I want you to come back to Sterling Innovations. Emma's expression shifted from curiosity to caution. As an intern again? No, Marcus said quickly. As a senior product designer with equity compensation and a direct reporting line to me, I want you to lead the next phase of neural flow development, and I want to give you the resources to pursue other innovative projects. Emma was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. Mr. Sterling, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure going back is the right decision for me. The environment that made me too intimidated to share my ideas in the first place, has that really changed? The question hit Marcus harder than he expected. He had been focused on the business implications of Emma's departure, the potential legal complications, and the missed opportunity to capitalize on her talents. But he hadn't fully considered the systemic issues that had prevented her contributions from being recognized in the first place. You're right to be skeptical, Marcus admitted. The truth is, I don't know if the environment has changed enough, but I want to try to change it, and I think you could help me figure out how. Emma studied his face, looking for signs of the calculated corporate maneuvering she had witnessed during her internship. Instead, she saw something that seemed genuine: uncertainty, regret, and what appeared to be a sincere desire to do better. What would that look like practically? Emma asked. How would you prevent the same dynamic from happening again, not just with me, but with other employees who might have valuable ideas, but lack the confidence or platform to share them? Marcus realized he didn't have a ready answer. His leadership style had been built on the assumption that the best ideas would naturally rise to the top through competition and assertiveness. He had never considered how many valuable contributions might be lost when talented people lacked the social capital or personality traits to navigate corporate hierarchies effectively. I don't know, he said honestly, but I think that's exactly why I need your perspective. You experienced our company culture as someone who had valuable contributions but felt unable to share them. You understand the barriers in ways that I clearly don't. Emma appreciated his honesty, even as she remained uncertain about his proposal. The past 3 months of independence had shown her that she could create meaningful work outside the corporate structure, and she was reluctant to give up that autonomy for the uncertain promise of reform. Can I ask you something, Mr. Sterling? Emma said. When you made the decision to terminate my employment, what did you see as my shortcomings? What would I have needed to do differently to avoid being let go? Marcus felt uncomfortable with the direct question, but he recognized that Emma deserved an honest answer. I saw someone who didn't demonstrate initiative or leadership potential. Someone who completed assigned tasks competently, but never showed the kind of ambition or innovative thinking we associate with high performers. And yet, I had spent months developing exactly the kind of innovative thinking you were looking for, Emma pointed out. The work that became Neural Flow represents initiative, leadership, and ambition. It just wasn't visible through the metrics you were using to evaluate performance. Marcus nodded, beginning to understand the deeper implications of Emma's observation. You're saying that our performance evaluation system is fundamentally flawed. I'm saying that your performance evaluation system works well for people who are comfortable with self-promotion and navigating corporate politics, Emma corrected. But it might miss valuable contributions from people who express their ambition differently. As they prepared to leave the cafe, Marcus felt a growing sense of urgency about addressing the systemic issues Emma had identified. Neural Flow's success had validated her individual talents, but her insights about organizational culture suggested much broader implications for Sterling Innovation's ability to recognize and develop talent. Emma, would you be willing to consult on these organizational issues even if you're not ready to return as a full-time employee? Marcus asked as they walked toward the cafe's exit. I'm starting to realize that fixing the problems you've identified might be more important than any individual product development. Emma considered the proposal as they stepped out into the cool Oakland evening. The neighborhood around them was alive with young professionals heading to dinner, families walking home from community centers, and the diverse mix of residents that made the area feel more authentic than the sanitized corporate environments she had grown accustomed to. I might be interested in that, Emma said carefully, but I'd want to understand exactly what kind of consulting you're envisioning, and I'd want some assurance that you're genuinely committed to systemic change rather than just managing the immediate crisis around Neural Flow. Marcus felt a spark of hope at her qualified acceptance. What would you need to see to be convinced of my commitment? Emma smiled slightly, the first genuine smile he had seen from her all evening. Start by paying me fairly for the work that became Neural Flow. Not as a settlement to avoid legal issues, but as recognition of the value I created. Then we can discuss how to prevent similar situations from happening to other employees. Marcus extended his hand, and Emma shook it firmly. Consider it done. My assistant will contact you tomorrow to arrange the financial details and discuss the consulting arrangement. As they parted ways, Marcus heading toward his Tesla parked on the main street, Emma walking toward the BART station, both felt they had begun something significant. For Marcus, the encounter had revealed blind spots in his leadership that went far beyond a single personnel decision. For Emma, it represented the possibility that her voice might finally be heard in the corporate world, not despite her quiet nature, but because of the unique perspective it provided. Neither fully understood yet how profoundly this chance meeting would reshape their professional lives and the culture of Sterling Innovations itself. 2 weeks after the cafe encounter, Emma found herself walking through the familiar lobby of Sterling Tower, but everything felt different this time. Instead of the nervous energy that had characterized her internship, she carried herself with quiet confidence, knowing that she was entering as a recognized expert rather than an expendable trainee. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor gave her time to reflect on the whirlwind of changes since her conversation with Marcus. The financial compensation for her neural flow contributions had been substantial, enough to pay off her student loans and provide security she had never experienced. More importantly, Marcus had publicly acknowledged her role in the product's development, issuing a company-wide memo that praised her innovative thinking and announced their new consulting partnership. Marcus met her at the elevator, and Emma noticed immediately that his demeanor had shifted from their previous encounter. While he maintained his professional composure, there was an underlying tension that suggested he was grappling with larger implications of their arrangement. "Emma, thank you for coming in," Marcus said as he guided her toward his office. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation, and I realize the scope of what we're discussing is much larger than I initially understood." His corner office looked exactly as Emma remembered, sleek, imposing, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of San Francisco Bay. But sitting across from Marcus's desk as a consultant, rather than a terminated intern, she felt less intimidated by the corporate grandeur. "I've been thinking about it too," Emma replied, settling into one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "I've spent the past 2 weeks talking to former colleagues and other professionals about their experiences with corporate innovation culture. The patterns I'm seeing suggest that what happened with neural flow isn't an isolated incident." Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. "What kind of patterns?" Emma pulled out a tablet and opened a presentation she had prepared. "I interviewed 23 people who have worked in tech companies similar to Sterling Innovations. 61% reported having valuable ideas that they never shared due to organizational barriers. 43% said they had developed innovations on their own time that their employers never knew about." She swiped to the next slide, showing a breakdown of the barriers people had identified. The most common obstacles were fear of criticism, lack of appropriate channels for sharing ideas, perception that only senior employees' ideas were taken seriously, and concern that their contributions wouldn't be properly credited. Marcus studied the data with growing concern. These numbers suggest we're potentially missing significant innovations across the industry. "Exactly," Emma confirmed. "And the cost isn't just lost innovation, it's also talent retention. 78% of the people I interviewed said they had either left their companies or were actively job searching because they felt their potential contributions weren't valued." Marcus stood and walked to his windows, looking out over the tech campus sprawling below. "Emma, what you're describing sounds like a fundamental flaw in how we've structured innovation within corporate environments." "I think it is," Emma agreed. "The traditional model assumes that the best ideas will naturally rise to the top through existing hierarchies and communication channels. But that model works best for people who are comfortable with self-promotion, political navigation, and assertive communication styles." She joined him at the windows, pointing toward the various company buildings visible in the distance. "There are probably dozens of potential neural flows sitting in development servers and personal projects across Silicon Valley, created by people who either don't know how to present their ideas or don't believe their organizations would be receptive." Marcus turned to face her, his expression reflecting the weight of this realization. "So, what do we do about it? How do we restructure our approach to innovation and talent recognition?" Emma had been hoping he would ask this question. Over the past 2 weeks, she had developed ideas for addressing the systemic issues they had identified, but implementing them would require significant changes to Sterling Innovation's corporate culture. "I think we need to pilot a new innovation incubation program," Emma said, returning to her presentation. "Instead of waiting for employees to present fully developed ideas through formal channels, we proactively seek out early-stage concepts and provide resources for development." She outlined her proposal: regular innovation surveys that would capture work-in-progress projects, dedicated time for employees to pursue personal innovations, mentorship programs that paired junior staff with senior leaders, and evaluation criteria that valued potential and creativity alongside immediate results. "The key," Emma explained, "is creating multiple pathways for ideas to surface, rather than relying on a single model that works well for some personality types, but excludes others." Marcus listened intently, occasionally asking questions about implementation details and resource requirements. As Emma spoke, he began to see not just a solution to their immediate challenges, but a potential competitive advantage that could position Sterling Innovations as a leader in innovation culture. "This could be transformative," Marcus said when Emma finished her presentation, "not just for preventing future neural flow situations, but for fundamentally improving our ability to identify and develop talent." Emma nodded, though she sensed there was something more Marcus needed to address. "I get the impression there's something else on your mind about this proposal." Marcus returned to his desk, his expression becoming more serious. "Emma, implementing this program will require me to acknowledge publicly that our previous approach was flawed. It means admitting that we've likely missed significant innovations and potentially lost valuable employees due to systemic problems." Emma understood the personal and professional stakes Marcus was grappling with. Admitting to fundamental flaws in leadership approach was risky for any CEO, particularly one whose reputation was built on demanding excellence and decisive action. "You're worried about how this will be perceived by investors, board members, and industry analysts," Emma observed. "I'm worried about undermining confidence in our leadership at a crucial growth phase," Marcus confirmed. "But I'm also beginning to realize that not addressing these issues might be even more damaging in the long term." Emma considered her response carefully. "Mr. Sterling, Neural Flow's success gives you credibility to advocate for innovation culture changes. You can frame this as building on success rather than fixing failures. The business case for capturing more innovations is compelling regardless of past mistakes." Marcus felt a sense of relief at Emma's perspective, but he also recognized the deeper change this represented in his own leadership philosophy. For years he had operated from a position of certainty and control, but addressing the issues Emma had identified would require embracing uncertainty and sharing authority in ways that felt foreign to his established approach. "Emma, I want you to lead the development and implementation of this innovation incubation program," Marcus said finally, "not as a consultant, but as a full-time senior director with the authority and resources to create meaningful change." Emma was quiet for a moment, weighing the offer against her growing appreciation for independence and meaningful work. "I'll consider it," she said finally, "but I want to see evidence that you're committed to the cultural changes this will require, not just the program itself." Marcus nodded, understanding that Emma's cautious response reflected hard-earned wisdom about corporate promises. "What would you need to see?" Emma smiled, remembering her first day as an intern, when she had been too intimidated to ask questions or challenge assumptions. "Start by restructuring your leadership team meetings to include voices from different levels of the organization. Show me that you can create the kind of inclusive environment you're asking me to design for the entire company." As Emma left Sterling Tower that afternoon, both she and Marcus understood that they were embarking on something much larger than either had initially envisioned. What had begun as a conversation about individual recognition had evolved into a comprehensive examination of how organizations identify, develop, and leverage talent in an increasingly complex and competitive landscape. 6 weeks into Emma's consulting engagement, the changes at Sterling Innovations were becoming visible throughout the organization. Marcus had implemented the first phase of Emma's recommendations, restructuring leadership meetings to include rotating participation from employees at all levels. The transformation was subtle but significant. Voices that had previously been silent were beginning to contribute ideas, and the executive team was discovering perspectives they had never encountered. Emma sat in Conference Room B, facilitating the inaugural meeting of the Innovation Discovery Committee, a cross-departmental group tasked with identifying and developing early-stage innovations throughout the company. The 15 participants represented every department and experience level, from senior engineers to recent hires in customer service. "Let's start with Sarah from marketing," Emma said, consulting her notes. "You mentioned during your department survey that you've been working on something related to customer engagement analytics." Sarah Martinez, a 26-year-old marketing coordinator who had been with the company for 8 months, shifted nervously in her seat. "It's probably not that important, but I've been tracking patterns in customer support tickets and social media mentions. I think I've identified some early warning indicators for customer dissatisfaction that we could use to prevent churn." Emma nodded encouragingly. "Tell us more about these patterns." As Sarah explained her analysis, connecting customer service language patterns with later cancellation rates, Emma noticed the familiar dynamic she had experienced during her own internship. Sarah's insights were sophisticated and potentially valuable, but her presentation was tentative, filled with qualifiers and self-deprecating language that undermined her credibility. "Sarah, the correlation coefficients you're describing suggest a very strong predictive model," said David Kim from Product Development. "Have you tested this against historical data?" "Well, I've run some informal analyses during my lunch breaks," Sarah admitted. "But I wasn't sure if it was worth pursuing officially. I mean, I'm just in marketing. I don't have formal training in data science." Emma recognized the exact mindset that had prevented her from sharing neural flow concepts during her internship. "Sarah, valuable insights can come from any perspective. Your position in marketing actually gives you unique access to customer communication patterns that data scientists in other departments might miss." Marcus, who had been quietly observing from the back of the room, stepped forward. "Sarah, I'd like you to present your findings to the executive team next week. Emma, can you work with Sarah to prepare a formal presentation?" Emma saw the mixture of excitement and terror in Sarah's expression, the same emotions she had felt when Marcus offered her the consulting position. "Absolutely. Sarah, let's schedule time this week to develop your analysis and prepare presentation materials." As the meeting continued, similar patterns emerged with other participants. Tom Chen from engineering had developed improvements to the company's internal development tools. Lisa Park from human resources had identified workflow optimizations that could improve employee satisfaction scores. Each person had valuable contributions that had remained invisible through traditional organizational channels. After the meeting ended and participants dispersed back to their departments, Marcus approached Emma with an expression of wonder, mixed with concern. "Emma, this was eye-opening," he said. "In 90 minutes, we identified more potentially valuable innovations than we typically see in quarterly reviews across entire departments." Emma gathered her materials, noting Marcus's reaction with satisfaction, but also caution. "The innovations were always there, Mr. Sterling. We just created a structure for them to become visible." Marcus walked with her toward the elevator, processing the implications of what he had witnessed. "I'm starting to understand why you were hesitant to return full-time. This isn't just about individual recognition. It's about fundamentally rethinking how organizations operate." "Exactly," Emma confirmed. "And that kind of change requires sustained commitment, not just initial enthusiasm. Cultural transformation is measured in years, not quarters." As they waited for the elevator, Marcus felt compelled to address something that had been troubling him since implementing Emma's recommendations. "Emma, I have to admit something. These changes are making me question a lot of assumptions about leadership and organizational effectiveness that I've held for my entire career." Emma studied his expression, seeing vulnerability that she had never witnessed during her internship. "What kind of assumptions?" "I built Sterling Innovations on the belief that the best ideas and strongest performers would naturally rise to the top through competition and merit-based evaluation," Marcus said. "But your experience and what we're seeing in these discovery sessions suggests that model excludes significant value simply because it favors certain communication styles and personality types." The elevator arrived and they stepped inside together. Emma considered her response as they descended toward the lobby, thinking about the months of doubt and self-questioning she had experienced after her termination. "Mr. Sterling, your merit-based model isn't wrong. It's just incomplete," Emma said finally. "Merit exists, but it expresses itself in many different ways. Some people demonstrate value through assertive leadership and public presentations. Others contribute through quiet innovation and detailed problem-solving. Both approaches have merit, but traditional corporate structures only recognize one of them effectively." Marcus nodded, though Emma could see he was still processing the personal implications of this realization. "So how do I reconcile that with the need to maintain high standards and drive results?" "You don't lower standards," Emma replied as they reached the lobby. "You expand your definition of how those standards can be met." Sarah's customer analytics work represents exactly the kind of innovative thinking you value. It just didn't fit the presentation format you were accustomed to seeing. As they parted ways outside Sterling Tower, Marcus felt both energized and unsettled by the day's revelations. The Innovation Discovery Committee had exceeded his expectations, but it had also challenged fundamental assumptions about his leadership approach that he wasn't sure he was ready to abandon completely. Emma, meanwhile, felt cautiously optimistic about the changes she was witnessing. The program was working as intended, surfacing valuable innovations and giving voice to previously unheard perspectives. But she also recognized that sustainable cultural change would require Marcus to continue embracing uncertainty and sharing authority in ways that might conflict with his established leadership identity. That evening, Emma returned to her apartment in Oakland and opened her laptop to document the day's observations. She had been tracking not just the innovations discovered through the program, but also the organizational dynamics and resistance patterns that emerged as Sterling Innovations attempted to implement new approaches to talent recognition. Her analysis suggested that while individual employees were enthusiastic about the new opportunities to contribute, middle management was showing signs of resistance to changes that potentially diminished their gatekeeping authority. Several department heads had expressed concerns about diluting focus and managing expectations that Emma recognized as coded resistance to democratizing innovation processes. She made a note to discuss these dynamics with Marcus during their next strategic planning session. The success of their transformation efforts would depend not just on creating new structures for innovation, but on addressing the power dynamics and entrenched interests that benefited from the status quo. As Emma worked late into the evening, she reflected on how dramatically her relationship with Sterling Innovations had evolved over the past 2 months. She had gone from being an invisible intern to playing a central role in reshaping the company's approach to innovation and talent development. But more importantly, she had discovered her own voice and learned to advocate for the systemic changes she believed were necessary. The quiet intern who had been too intimidated to share neural flow was becoming a confident leader, capable of challenging established practices and driving organizational transformation. The changes at Sterling Innovations were proving to be as much about Emma's personal growth as they were about corporate culture reform. 3 months into the Innovation Discovery Program, Emma found herself facing the inevitable backlash that accompanies significant organizational change. She sat in Marcus's office on a gray San Francisco morning, reviewing incident reports that painted a troubling picture of middle management resistance to the cultural shifts they were implementing. "The patterns are becoming clear," Emma said, spreading printed emails and meeting transcripts across Marcus's desk. "Department heads are finding subtle ways to undermine the program without directly opposing it." Marcus picked up one of the documents, reading aloud from an email sent by Jennifer Walsh, the head of business development. "While we appreciate the innovative thinking emerging from these discovery sessions, we must ensure that our focus remains on proven strategies rather than experimental approaches that could distract from quarterly objectives." Emma nodded grimly. Jennifer isn't wrong about maintaining focus, but she's using operational concerns to dismiss ideas that challenge her department's traditional approaches. Tom's engineering improvements were labeled premature optimization, and Lisa's HR workflow suggestions were deemed outside the scope of current priorities. Marcus set down the email, his expression reflecting frustration and disappointment. "I explicitly communicated that supporting these innovations was a company priority. How are department heads justifying resistance to direct leadership directives?" "They're not resisting directly," Emma explained. They're using established corporate language about risk management and resource allocation to create barriers. It's professionally acceptable resistance disguised as prudent management. Emma pulled up a presentation on her tablet, showing data she had collected over the past month. Look at these implementation rates. Ideas generated by senior employees are being developed at 3 times the rate of those from junior staff, despite similar potential value assessments from our evaluation committee. Marcus studied the charts, seeing clear evidence of the systemic bias Emma had identified. This suggests that our cultural problems go deeper than I realized. It's not enough to create new processes if the underlying power structures remain unchanged. Emma had been dreading this conversation, but knew it was necessary for the program's long-term success. Mr. Sterling, we've reached the point where we need to address personnel decisions. Some department heads are actively undermining the changes you've mandated, and their resistance is becoming a barrier to progress. Marcus stood and walked to his windows, looking out over the San Francisco skyline as he processed Emma's recommendation. Making personnel changes at the senior level would send a clear message about his commitment to cultural transformation, but it would also create instability during a crucial growth period for the company. Which department heads are you most concerned about? Marcus asked without turning around. Emma consulted her notes, feeling the weight of potentially impacting people's careers. Jennifer Walsh in business development and Robert Chen in operations have been the most consistently resistant. They've found ways to delay or redirect every innovation that emerged from their departments. And you believe their resistance is intentional rather than legitimate operational concern? Emma had anticipated this question and prepared a detailed analysis. I've been tracking their responses to innovations versus their public statements about supporting change. The pattern suggests deliberate obstruction rather than good faith concern about implementation challenges. Marcus returned to his desk, his expression serious. Emma, what you're asking me to do represents a significant escalation. If I remove senior leaders for resisting cultural change, it sends a message that could create fear and compliance, rather than genuine transformation. Emma understood Marcus's concern, but she also recognized the critical nature of this decision point. Mr. Sterling, if you allow continued undermining of the changes you've mandated, it sends a different message, that your commitment to transformation is negotiable and that established power structures will ultimately prevail. As they discussed the implications of potential personnel changes, Emma's phone buzzed with a text message that made her pause. It was from Sarah Martinez, the marketing coordinator, whose customer analytics work had been one of the program's early successes. Mr. Sterling, I think you need to see this, Emma said, handing him her phone. The message read, Emma, Jennifer just told me that my churn prediction project is being suspended due to resource constraints. She said the company needs to focus on core competencies rather than experimental analytics. I thought you should know. Marcus read the message twice, his jaw tightening with each reading. Sarah's project had been personally endorsed by Marcus and had shown preliminary results that could save the company millions in customer retention costs. Jennifer's decision to suspend it was a direct contradiction of his stated priorities. This isn't about resource constraints, Marcus said, his voice carrying an edge Emma had rarely heard. This is about Jennifer protecting her department's traditional approaches from alternatives that might prove more effective. Emma watched Marcus process the implications of Jennifer's decision, recognizing that they had reached a crucial moment in the transformation process. What are you going to do? Marcus was quiet for several minutes, staring at Emma's phone as he weighed his options. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a resolve that Emma found both reassuring and concerning. I'm going to call an emergency executive meeting for this afternoon. Jennifer, Robert, and any other department head who has been undermining our innovation initiatives will be given a choice: fully support the changes we're implementing or find opportunities elsewhere. Emma felt a mixture of relief and apprehension at Marcus's decision. Are you sure you're ready for the potential consequences? Some of these people have been with the company for years and have significant institutional knowledge. Marcus looked directly at Emma, his expression reflecting a clarity that hadn't been present during their earlier conversations. Emma, 3 months ago I fired you because I couldn't recognize the value you were contributing. I'm not going to make the same mistake by allowing other valuable contributors to be silenced by people who are threatened by change. As Emma prepared to leave Marcus's office, She reflected on how dramatically their relationship had evolved since that first encounter at Café Luna. Marcus was no longer the unquestioning corporate leader who had dismissed her contributions, but he also wasn't yet the transformational leader the company needed. He was somewhere in between, learning to navigate the complex challenges of genuine organizational change. "Mr. Sterling," Emma said as she reached the door, "whatever happens in today's meeting, remember that cultural transformation is a process, not an event. The people who stay need to understand that supporting innovation isn't just about avoiding termination. It's about embracing a fundamentally different approach to leadership and collaboration." Marcus nodded, though Emma could see the weight of the afternoon's decisions settling on his shoulders. "Emma, regardless of how this plays out, I want you to know that this process has changed how I think about leadership in ways that go far beyond Sterling Innovations." As Emma left his office, both she and Marcus understood that the afternoon's executive meeting would determine whether their transformation efforts would succeed or fail. The resistance they had encountered was forcing them to confront the fundamental question of whether established corporate cultures could truly change, or whether meaningful innovation required starting fresh with entirely new organizational structures. The quiet intern, who had once been too intimidated to share her ideas, was now playing a central role in determining the future direction of a billion-dollar company. But more importantly, she was discovering that her voice, once found, had the power to influence not just individual recognition, but entire systems of how organizations identify, develop, and leverage human potential. The executive conference room felt different at 3 o'clock that afternoon. Marcus had deliberately chosen the smaller meeting space on the 39th floor rather than the imposing boardroom where he typically held senior leadership meetings. The change in venue was intentional. He wanted this conversation to feel less like a formal corporate proceeding and more like a direct discussion about the company's future direction. Emma sat in the back corner as an observer, her role officially limited to providing context about the Innovation Discovery Program's implementation challenges. She watched as the 7 department heads filed in, their expressions ranging from curious to visibly apprehensive. Word had spread quickly through the executive ranks that Marcus had called an emergency meeting to address cultural alignment issues. Jennifer Walsh entered last, her posture radiating the confident authority that had made her successful in business development for the past 5 years. She took her usual seat near the head of the table, exchanging brief pleasantries with colleagues while maintaining the professional demeanor that had served her well throughout her corporate career. Marcus began without his typical preliminary remarks or agenda review. "Thank you all for adjusting your schedules on short notice. We're here to discuss the Innovation Discovery Program and specifically the implementation challenges we've encountered over the past month." He gestured toward Emma, acknowledging her presence without immediately shifting focus to her observations. "As you know, Emma has been tracking the program's progress across all departments. What we've discovered is concerning and requires immediate attention." Jennifer leaned forward slightly, her expression attentive but showing no sign of concern. "Marcus, I think we're all committed to supporting innovation within our departments. If there are specific implementation issues, we should address them constructively." Marcus pulled out printed copies of the documentation Emma had compiled, distributing them around the table. These reports show a pattern of systematic resistance to innovations emerging from the discovery sessions. Projects endorsed at the executive level are being delayed, redirected, or suspended using operational justifications that don't align with our stated priorities. Robert Chen from Operations cleared his throat, his discomfort evident. "Marcus, I think there might be some misunderstanding about resource allocation and project prioritization. We are trying to balance innovation with operational stability." Emma watched the familiar corporate dance beginning, the careful language, the deflection of responsibility, the reframing of resistance as prudent management. It was exactly the dynamic that had prevented her from sharing neural flow during her internship. "Robert, let's be specific," Marcus said, opening one of the reports. The workflow optimization suggestions from Lisa Park's HR analysis were projected to improve employee satisfaction by 12% and reduce processing time by 30%. Your department suspended implementation, citing insufficient data validation. Can you explain what additional validation was needed? Robert shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward Jennifer for support. We felt that implementing significant workflow changes during a growth period could create unnecessary disruption. The timing seemed problematic. Marcus set down the report and looked directly at Robert. The timing seemed problematic, or the source of the suggestion seemed problematic. Lisa is a mid-level HR coordinator, not a senior operations analyst. Would you have requested additional validation if the same suggestion had come from a McKinsey consultant? The question hung in the air, creating a tension that Emma recognized as the moment when polite corporate resistance would either be acknowledged or escalate into open conflict. She could see Robert processing the implications of his answer, understanding that Marcus was forcing him to confront his own biases about whose ideas deserved serious consideration. Jennifer intervened before Robert could respond. Marcus, I think we need to be careful about creating false equivalencies. External consultants bring specialized expertise and objective analysis that our internal staff, however talented, may not possess. It's not about bias, it's about maintaining appropriate standards for strategic decisions. Emma felt her heart rate increase as she recognized Jennifer's sophisticated deflection. By reframing the issue as maintaining standards rather than acknowledging bias, Jennifer was making resistance seem like responsible leadership rather than problematic gatekeeping. Marcus evidently recognized the same dynamic. Jennifer, let's examine that standard. Sarah Martinez's customer churn prediction model has shown 93% accuracy in preliminary testing. Her analysis identified patterns that our external analytics consultants missed entirely. Yet your department suspended her project yesterday, citing resource constraints. Can you explain how maintaining appropriate standards justifies ignoring demonstrably effective innovations? Jennifer's composure flickered momentarily, but she recovered quickly. Sarah's work shows promise, but it represents a significant departure from our established customer retention strategies. Implementing experimental approaches during our current growth phase carries risks that need to be carefully evaluated. Emma watched Marcus's expression harden as he processed Jennifer's response. She could see him recognizing the same pattern of resistance, disguised as prudent management, that had characterized his own initial reaction to systemic change. Jennifer, what you're describing as risk management looks remarkably similar to the thinking that led to my terminating Emma 6 months ago, Marcus said, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone in the room take notice. I dismissed her contributions because they didn't fit my established expectations about how valuable innovations should be presented. Are you making the same mistake with Sarah's work? The comparison clearly stung Jennifer, who had been present during the company-wide meeting where Marcus publicly acknowledged his error in terminating Emma. Marcus, that's not a fair comparison. I'm not dismissing Sarah's work. I'm exercising appropriate caution about implementation timing. Marcus stood, walking to the whiteboard mounted on the conference room's wall. Let me show you something that might clarify our priorities. He drew a simple chart showing NeuralFlow's revenue impact over the past 3 months, then wrote Emma's name beneath it. This product has generated $47 million in revenue and positioned us as innovation leaders in our sector, Marcus said, turning back to face the room. It was created by someone I fired for failing to demonstrate initiative and leadership potential. The disconnect between my evaluation and her actual contributions nearly cost us our most successful product launch. He returned to his seat, his gaze moving from person to person around the table. I called this meeting because I see the same disconnect happening again, with multiple innovations being dismissed or delayed by leaders who are uncomfortable with ideas that don't originate from traditional sources. Emma observed the room's dynamics shifting as Marcus's message became clearer. Some department heads looked genuinely concerned about their own potential blind spots, while others, particularly Jennifer and Robert, appeared increasingly defensive. Marcus, what exactly are you asking us to do? Asked David Kim from Product Development, his tone suggesting genuine desire to understand rather than defensive positioning. Marcus consulted his notes, then looked directly at each department head. I'm asking you to examine whether your implementation decisions are based on objective assessment of innovation value or unconscious bias about whose ideas deserve serious consideration. And I'm telling you that continued resistance to the cultural changes we're implementing is not compatible with your continued leadership roles at Sterling Innovations. The ultimatum was delivered with quiet authority, but its implications were unmistakable. Jennifer's expression shifted from defensive to calculating as she processed the career consequences of continued resistance to Marcus's transformation agenda. "Are you saying that supporting the Innovation Discovery Program is now a condition of employment for senior leadership?" Jennifer asked, her professional mask beginning to slip. Marcus met her gaze directly. "I'm saying that leaders who undermine company priorities, regardless of their rationale, are not leaders we can afford during a transformation period. You have the choice to embrace change and help drive our success, or to find opportunities elsewhere that better align with your management philosophy." As the meeting concluded with explicit expectations for immediate changes in department-level innovation support, Emma realized she had witnessed a fundamental shift in Marcus's leadership approach. The tentative, uncertain executive who had approached her at Café Luna had evolved into someone willing to risk organizational stability to protect the cultural changes they had worked to implement. But she also recognized that the afternoon's confrontation was just the beginning of a more complex challenge. Changing individual behaviors through ultimatums was easier than changing the underlying systems and incentives that had created resistance in the first place. The real test of their transformation efforts would come in the weeks ahead, as they worked to build sustainable cultural change rather than simple compliance with new directives. 6 months after her termination, Emma Chen stood before the Sterling Innovations Board of Directors, presenting the quarterly results of the Innovation Discovery Program. The conference room that had once intimidated her during brief intern orientations now felt like a natural environment for sharing insights and advocating for systemic change. The program has identified and developed 43 distinct innovations across all departments, Emma reported, clicking through slides that showed both quantitative metrics and qualitative impact stories. 12 of these have moved to full implementation, with projected annual value exceeding $28 million. Board member Patricia Wells leaned forward with interest. "Emma, these results are impressive, but I'm particularly interested in the cultural metrics you've included. Can you explain how you're measuring changes in employee engagement and innovation participation?" Emma smiled, appreciating Patricia's focus on the deeper implications of their work. "We track several indicators. Voluntary participation in discovery sessions has increased by 300%, cross-departmental collaboration projects have doubled, and our employee satisfaction scores related to feeling heard and opportunities for contribution have reached the highest levels in company history." She advanced to a slide showing retention rates for high-potential employees. Most significantly, turnover among employees with strong technical skills but limited corporate experience has dropped by 60%. We're retaining talent that would have previously left for environments where their contributions were more readily recognized. Marcus, who had been quietly observing from his seat at the head of the table, felt a deep sense of satisfaction watching Emma command the room with confidence and expertise. The transformation wasn't just organizational, it was personal, reflecting her own growth from silenced intern to influential leader. "The financial results speak for themselves," added board chair Michael Rodriguez. "But I'm curious about the sustainability of these changes. How do we ensure that this cultural shift persists beyond the initial enthusiasm period?" Emma had anticipated this question and prepared a comprehensive response. "We've institutionalized the changes through 3 primary mechanisms: restructured performance evaluations that include innovation mentorship and collaboration metrics, modified hiring criteria that value diverse thinking styles alongside technical qualifications, and leadership development programs that teach managers to recognize and nurture non-traditional contributions." She clicked to a slide showing the organizational chart. "We've also created formal pathways for ideas to move from discovery to implementation, removing the dependency on individual manager discretion that previously created bottlenecks." After the board presentation concluded and members filed out with expressions of satisfaction and approval, Emma remained behind with Marcus to discuss the program's next phase. The afternoon sun streamed through the conference room windows, casting warm light across the polished table where they had conducted so many strategic planning sessions over the past months. "Emma, I have something I want to discuss with you," Marcus said, his tone carrying significance that made her look up from organizing her presentation materials. "What's on your mind?" Emma asked, settling back into her chair. Marcus pulled out a folder he had been keeping on the table throughout the board meeting. The board has approved a proposal I submitted last week. We're creating a new C-level position, Chief Innovation Officer, with responsibility for cultural development, talent recognition systems, and strategic innovation initiatives across the company. Emma felt her heart rate increase as she began to understand the implications of Marcus's announcement. That sounds like a significant expansion of what we've been doing with the Discovery program. It is, Marcus confirmed, and I want you to take the position. Full executive authority, equity compensation, and a seat on the board of directors. You would be the youngest C-level executive in company history, and one of the few people in the industry with this specific combination of technical expertise and cultural transformation experience. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of the offer. 6 months earlier, she had been terminated as an expendable intern. Now she was being offered one of the most senior positions in the company, with the authority to influence not just Sterling Innovations, but potentially the broader industry's approach to innovation culture. Marcus, this is incredibly generous, but I need to understand what you're really asking, Emma said carefully. Are you offering me this position because you believe I'm the best person for the job, or because you feel obligated to compensate for past mistakes? Marcus appreciated her directness, recognizing the same careful thinking that had made her such an effective consultant and program leader. Emma, 6 months ago I would have said I was offering this because you've proven exceptional capability and delivered measurable results. But honestly, I think it's both. I am trying to correct past mistakes, but more importantly, I've learned that correcting those mistakes requires putting the best people in positions where they can prevent similar errors in the future. Emma considered his response, understanding the complex motivations behind his offer. What would success look like in this role? How would we measure whether the cultural changes we've implemented are truly sustainable? Marcus had prepared for this question, knowing that Emma would want clear objectives and metrics rather than vague aspirational goals. Success would mean that 5 years from now, Sterling Innovations is known industry-wide as the place where innovative thinking is recognized and developed regardless of its source. We become the company that other organizations study when they want to improve their own innovation cultures. Emma felt the appeal of Marcus's vision, but she also recognized the enormous challenges involved in scaling their pilot program to industry influence. Marcus, what we've accomplished here is significant, but it's also been possible because you were willing to make difficult personnel decisions and support changes that challenged established practices. Industry transformation would require convincing other leaders to make similar commitments, which is exactly why I need someone with your experience and credibility in this role, Marcus replied. You understand both the technical aspects of innovation development and the cultural dynamics that prevent good ideas from being recognized. That combination is rare, and it's exactly what the industry needs. As they continued discussing the position's scope and responsibilities, Emma found herself drawn to the possibility of expanding their work beyond Sterling Innovations. The Discovery program had proven that systematic approaches to cultural change could produce measurable results, and she was increasingly convinced that similar interventions could benefit organizations throughout the technology sector. I'll take the position, Emma said finally, but with one condition. I want to establish an external consulting practice that can work with other companies on similar cultural transformation initiatives. Sterling Innovations should become a laboratory for innovation culture development, not just a beneficiary of it. Marcus extended his hand across the table. I think that's exactly what we need to ensure these changes have lasting impact beyond our own organization. As they shook hands, both Emma and Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as a chance encounter in an Oakland cafe had evolved into a comprehensive transformation of how Sterling Innovations approached talent recognition and innovation development. For Emma, the journey represented the discovery of her own voice and the development of confidence to advocate for systemic change. The quiet intern who had been too intimidated to share neural flow had become a leader capable of influencing industry-wide practices around innovation culture. For Marcus, the experience had challenged fundamental assumptions about leadership and organizational effectiveness. He had learned that true innovation required creating environments where diverse thinking styles could contribute, and that recognizing talent meant looking beyond traditional markers of ambition and self-promotion. As evening approached and they prepared to leave the conference room, Emma looked out over the San Francisco skyline, where dozens of technology companies were wrestling with their own innovation challenges. In the months ahead, she would have the opportunity to help other organizations avoid the mistakes that had nearly cost Sterling Innovations its most valuable breakthrough. The story that had begun with a termination notice was ending with the creation of new pathways for recognition, contribution, and growth. Emma Chen had not only found her voice, she had used it to ensure that other quiet innovators would never again have their contributions go unrecognized. Standing in the conference room where she had once been too intimidated to speak, Emma felt the profound satisfaction of knowing that her experience would help create workplaces where talent could flourish regardless of personality type or communication style. The transformation was complete, but in many ways it was also just beginning.